It's a beautiful cold winter afternoon of the new year, and I wanted to show you a whole lot of books and tell you about a lot of books. This might be just a first part of the full series of these videos. I wanted to show you the books that I read throughout 2020 and just try to do a really quick review of each book. I have limited shelf space, so throughout 2020 I've been stacking up the books I was reading, and I have a whole stack right here. This is about a half of the books I read. Some of them were in audio, some were ebooks, others were from a library or a sibling of friends. These are the books that I do have with me. So let's start from the very first books I read in 2020. Okay, so the very first book that I read was a nonfiction book by Randy Kay, Dying to Meet Jesus. And this is his account of how he died and encountered heaven and how it changed his life. I was always rather skeptical about different kind of supernatural experiences that people read about, as you never know what could be out there and what's truth and what's not. And what made me pick up this one was his introduction, how he wrote in the very beginning that for a long time I did not want to write this book for fear of the skepticism I myself used to feel after hearing others share similar accounts. I used to mock those claiming to have met God in near-death experiences. And so here he is writing the similar experience. Randy Kay is a CEO and a chairman of several companies. Basically, I thought, because he was such an important man in a few companies, he had a few things to lose by sharing this story. He wouldn't just write this for popularity, so I thought it might be worth reading. And I was rather challenged and found this book very interesting because of the things that he experienced and saw, the supernatural. Of course, so we don't know what it's like in heaven until we are there, so it's hard to say how real his experience is and how true, but I found it interesting. And I have a few sticky notes here of the things I found interesting, although there are some things that are questionable. Well, things that I don't necessarily agree with. It is more of a charismatic book, published by Chosen, division of Baker Publishing Group. And even though I don't necessarily agree with everything, I did enjoy it, and I hope to reread it again sometime. The next book I read in 2020 was one of my favorites, and it still is. This is The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. I have not read any of Montgomery books before, so this was the first read for me, and I enjoyed it so much. And I hope to reread it again. It has these beautiful descriptions and a beautiful and truly sweet love story. Next book was a contemporary, More Than We Remember by Christina Susan Nelson. I remember I read this book. I was on a road trip, and it was about a 5-hour road trip, and I was able to read this book on the way there and back, and almost till the end, and just have a good memories associated with reading this book. And this was a really interesting book, and it was not hard to read because I was reading it so many hours straight. I didn't find it overwhelming or hard to read. but it was more of like a suspense type of story where there's a car accident, and the person involved, he loses his memory of that specific moment, and he can't remember what happened, why he got into this car accident, and everyone thinks he's guilty, and so there's a trial, and over time he begins to regain that memory and try to recover it, and in the end there is an unexpected end. So I did enjoy this book. Okay, this book, Paper Hearts by Courtney Walsh. I read this around, I believe it was, around Valentine's Day, and it was just such a perfect read. I think it was one of my favorite Valentine reads. It had all these beautiful kind of a small town coffee shops, a bookshop type of feel, and all these descriptions, and a really beautiful love story. I really enjoyed this book. The books that have talk about old matchmakers, these old ladies who try to match couples together, I think they are so cute and sometimes very funny. So this was one of such books. This one is from the second part from the Brideship series by Jodi Hedlund. This was one and only book that I read from the series. I wasn't fully prepared or knew what to expect from this book, so I might have enjoyed it more if I knew what it was about. For me, it was the first time reading about bride ships. I never knew there was such a thing as brides being shipped to a village or a town due to the lack of women. So this was a story about Arabella, and she flees to British Columbia on a bride ship, and there she meets Lieutenant Richard Drummond. And then there's another man, Peter Kelly, and he's a townsbaker. And so there's two men who compete for her affection. This book also deals with the natives and an outbreak of smallpox. So their views clash with how they treat the natives, and she basically she has to make a decision: would she choose a man from a higher class who has more money, more power, and certain beliefs, or would she choose a man who is lower in class and just a simple man, yet he has a heart of caring for people in need? So it was an interesting read. However, it is more of like more spicy, I would say. So yeah. Okay, this one is a biblical fiction by Davis Bunn and Janet Oak, The Centurion's Wife, and this is the first book of Acts of Faith. I don't remember much about this book. It wasn't super memorable. I do have 2 more books from this series, so hopefully I'll be able to continue reading them. And here I have 2 biographies. This one is by Michael Van Dyke. This is a story about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or Dietrich, Radical Integrity. This is somewhat of a overview of who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was and his life. We hope to read more books about him, about his life. So Dietrich was a theologian, a pastor, and a professor, and he lived during the World War II, and he was a Christian German. So he was a part of a resistance group that tried to stand up against Adolf Hitler, and there was actually a few times that they tried to assassinate Adolf Hitler. I believe it was 3 times, and each time something came up and it never worked out. It involves kind of a very deep theological, moral questions and things to ponder and think through. And the second book was about Albert Schweitzer, Answering the Call, the doctor who made Africa his life. And it's written by Ken Geyer. So Albert Schweitzer was one of Europe's most renowned philosophers, theologians, and musicians in the early 20th century. He had so many different opportunities to raise up in this society. He answered the call to go to Africa, and he became a doctor, and he spent many years of his life ministering to them and sharing the gospel that way. I never heard about Albert Schweitzer before, which is surprising because he seemed like a very like a man used much by God. And this is also a short introductory read about his life, and I do hope to read more about him. And this book is a non-fiction, The Secrets of the Happy Soul by Katie Orr. I remember really liking this book. I would read this book in the mornings during my quiet time, and there was a lot of things that I underlined. So I can read a little part from here. I thought that because I had salvation, I would no longer struggle. I believed that the Christian life was supposed to be easy, and that my soul should be magically filled with happiness and joy, fulfillment and success. However, I missed all the Bible verses that state that this life on earth is hard. Experiencing and enjoying God takes cultivating, and this world is not my permanent home. I do hope to reread this book sometime again and be able to apply it more into my life. I don't have a physical copy of this next book, but I really wanted to mention it as well, as I really enjoyed reading it. Insanity of God by Nick Ripken, and this is a true story of faith resurrected, and it's a powerful testimony of faith surviving in the most harsh places. Nick Ripken, he was a journalist who traveled to the most persecuted areas of the world, including China, Middle East, as well as the Soviet Union, and he would travel and visit various churches, sometimes in secret, and he would interview people who were under persecution. Some of them were previously arrested, and he would try to find out why people in these harsh situations, these harsh lifestyles, why their faith survived, why they did not lose their faith in God. It was a very, very powerful book. There's another one, The Insanity of Obedience. I bought that one and I hope to read it this year. This one, Before I Called You Mine by Nicole Deese. This is a contemporary book about adoption. The main character, she is a single woman who's close to her 30s, if not over her 30s, with no prospect of marriage. She decides to apply for adoption of a child from Asia, and this process takes really long time in order to be matched with the child. And then by the time she's matched, she meets a man, and so she has to make this decision. Does she still want to adopt a child and have her dream come true, or will she choose to marry a man when she finally meets one? And I learned a lot about the way adoption works from this book, and the author, she has had experience in adoption, so I thought it was a book worth reading, and it was beautifully written. So this one is also contemporary. It is from the Hope Harbor series by Irene Hannon. Starfish Pierre. I like this book for its the sea ocean type of feels, and at that time when I was reading this book, it was during the lockdown. We had to stay home and no one could travel anywhere, go to the beach, and I enjoyed traveling via this story to the beach, and this was a beautiful story of redemption that touched on many different hard topics, I would say. There was addiction, a life being close to suicide, terminal disease, unfixable mistakes from the past, disability. So it had various different, rather hard topics, but it was filled with hope, and on all of these situations there's hope. This book was one of my favorite reads as well. This is by Corrie ten Boom, The Hiding Place. This is a story set during World War II. This is a true real-life story about a family who were hiding Jews, and then someone told on them, and so their family got arrested, and they were imprisoned in a concentration camp with the Jews. And in here, Corrie shares her experience and the lessons she learned, and it's truly such an interesting book. Another historical book as well about World War II. This is by Elie Wiesel, and he was a Jewish man who himself also experienced time in concentration camps, and it's a very sad account of his experience. You could just feel the sadness in his heart, the sadness of the whole experience. Next two books are nonfiction. This one is Thriving in Love and Money by Auntie and Jeff. I don't know how to pronounce their last name. This is a book for couples on how to manage money, how to discuss that topic, because many disagreements or problems in family and relationships arise from the way they use money and share finances. And this one Small Step by Matthew Barnett. This is a book on the life-changing adventure of following God's nudging. David Barnett, he is a senior pastor of Los Angeles Dream Center, and he just shares his experience, how God called him into this ministry, how he started out, and spiritual insight of being in this ministry. After each chapter, there are areas where you can fill out the next step you will take to follow God's nudge. I filled out some areas, not all of them. Another nonfiction, and I actually listened to this book on audio, but I now do have a physical copy, God Smuggler by Brother Andrew, and I really enjoyed this book. It was also one of my favorites. This is a story about Brother Andrew. He dreamed of being an undercover spy working behind enemy lines, and God actually led him to that, to work undercover for God. So he was visiting various countries and smuggling Bibles into these countries. It was very interesting to see how God provided for him and just the miracles that happened in his life during this time of ministry. There are different pictures as well, and I hope to reread it again. The next book is by Cindy Sproles. This is a story about a 17-year-old Worry, and she's left behind as an orphan, and along with a few other orphan children, after influenza and typhoid spread, this girl, she has to figure out a way of how to survive and to care for these children. I wouldn't say I really enjoyed this book. There was one part that I was kind of disappointed about, but I do like the book cover. The nature and the hairstyle. This one by Tessa Afshar, Pearl in the Sand. It's based on the story of Rahab. She was a prostitute. It's an interesting way how this book was written, and I liked how the author presented the way she started out, that maybe Rahab didn't do it by choice, but she was forced to by her family. So this was a interesting read. And this is my last book for this part of the 2020 book reads. So in the next part, I'll continue talking about the rest of these books. So I hope you'll join, and I'll see you in the next video.